How did servants keep the queen's bed warm? Imagine a castle after sunset, when the last pale light has disappeared beyond the hills, and the stone walls begin to hold the cold of the night. Outside, winter has settled over the countryside. The fields are dark beneath a thin covering of frost. Bare branches move gently in the wind. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, a stream continues to run through the frozen landscape, its sound faint beneath the winter air. Inside, the castle is quieter. The great hall, which only a short time ago was filled with voices, footsteps, dishes, and the soft crackling of a large fire, is slowly becoming still. Servants carry away the remains of the evening meal. Wooden tables are cleared. Rushes or other floor coverings are disturbed by footsteps as people move through the room. But the night is not yet finished for everyone. Somewhere deeper inside the castle, another part of the household is beginning its evening work. The queen will soon retire, and before she does, her bed must be prepared. To understand what this meant, it helps to forget the image of a modern bedroom for a moment. A medieval royal chamber was not simply a private room containing a bed. It was part of a larger household system. A royal or noble residence could contain many rooms and many people, and the movement of servants through those spaces was carefully organized. Household officials, chamber servants, ladies, pages, cooks, porters, laundresses, grooms, and many others could have duties connected to the daily life of the ruler. The queen's bed belonged to that world. It was furniture, certainly, but it was also a place of privacy, ceremony, comfort, security, and status. And on a freezing winter night, preparing it required more thought than simply pulling back the blankets. Picture yourself walking quietly through the castle as the evening deepens. The walls around you are thick. Stone has a particular way of feeling cold. Even after a fire has warmed a chamber, the surrounding masonry can remain chilly for hours. Windows may allow drafts to enter. Doors open and close. Corridors can be colder still. The people preparing the queen's chamber, therefore, had to work with the building itself. The first concern was often the fire. A medieval fireplace was not the same as a modern central heating system. A fire could provide warmth, light, and a place for cooking, but its heat was concentrated near the hearth and became less effective with distance. The size and design of the fireplace mattered. So did the fuel. Wood was an important source of heat in many parts of medieval Europe, while charcoal and other fuels were also used in different circumstances and regions. Someone had to make sure that sufficient fuel was available. Someone had to tend the fire, and someone had to think about what would happen after the queen went to sleep. A fire left burning through the night could provide warmth, but it also brought danger. An open flame inside a building filled with timber, cloth, straw, rushes, furniture, and other combustible materials was never entirely harmless. So the evening preparation involved a quiet balance. There had to be enough warmth, but there also had to be caution. As the servants worked, the room might slowly change character. During the day, it could have been a place of conversation, work, reading, receiving visitors, or household business. At night, it became more secluded. Curtains might be drawn. The bed could be enclosed more closely. The room might become darker, with only the glow of the fire and the small light of candles or lamps. And then there was the bed itself. A royal bed could be substantial. Bed frames were commonly made from wood, and wealthy households could possess elaborate beds with posts, curtains, carved details, or decorated textiles. The exact design depended greatly on the period, region, and wealth of the household. There was no single medieval bed. But there was one important difference between such a bed and the simple mattress many people imagine. The sleeping surface was built in layers. The mattress might be stuffed with materials such as straw, wool, or other fibers, depending on place and period. Straw-filled mattresses were common among ordinary people, while wealthier households could use better quality materials and more carefully constructed bedding. The mattress itself was only one part. Sheets covered it. Blankets or coverlets were placed above. Additional coverings could be used when temperatures dropped. And in a wealthy royal household, textiles could be valuable possessions. Cloth was expensive. Fine linen required considerable labor. Wool required animals, shearing, cleaning, spinning, weaving, and finishing. Decorated fabrics required still more work. So the people caring for the queen's chamber were not handling disposable objects. They were handling valuable household property. Every sheet, blanket, curtain, and coverlet belonged to an economic world that had taken months or years of labor to produce. The servants knew this. They also knew that bedding had to remain clean. Laundry in a medieval castle was not a simple matter of turning a tap and placing sheets into a washing machine. Water had to be obtained. Cloth had to be washed by hand. It might be beaten, rinsed, wrung, dried, and aired. Soap was available in medieval Europe, although its ingredients and quality varied. Other cleaning methods were also used. Sunlight and fresh air could help reduce odors and moisture. And sometimes bedding was shaken, aired, or otherwise maintained, rather than washed after every use. The queen's bed therefore represented an ongoing routine. It was prepared, used, maintained, aired, cleaned, repaired, and prepared again. On a cold night, however, warmth became especially important. Imagine the servants entering the chamber carrying folded bedding. The fabric is cool against their hands. The room is dim. The fire gives off a low orange light. The air smells faintly of smoke and wood. The stone around the fireplace remains warm in places and cold in others. The servants begin arranging the bed. They would need to make sure the sheets were properly positioned. The mattress had to be settled. The coverings had to be arranged so that the sleeper could remain warm. And the bed curtains, where present, could be drawn to create a more enclosed space. Bed curtains were useful for more than appearance. They could provide a degree of privacy. They could also help create a smaller enclosed area around the sleeper. In a large chamber, reducing the space immediately around the bed could make the sleeping area feel somewhat more protected from drafts. It would not turn a medieval chamber into a modern heated room. But small changes mattered. A curtain could block moving air. A thick covering could hold warmth close to the body. A mattress could separate the sleeper from the cold structure beneath. And layers of cloth could make the difference between an uncomfortable night and a tolerable one. The servants therefore worked with simple physical principles. Warmth rises. Cold air moves. Thick materials slow the loss of heat. Enclosed spaces feel different from open ones. These were not theories written in a scientific manual. They were practical experiences, repeated night after night. The people who cared for beds did not need modern explanations to understand that a cold draft could make someone shiver. They knew because they had felt it themselves. And they knew that the Queen would feel it too. There is another detail worth remembering. The Queen was not necessarily alone in the castle. Royal sleeping arrangements were connected to the structure of the household. Attendants could sleep nearby. Ladies-in-waiting might have chambers or sleeping spaces associated with the Queen's household. Servants could be stationed close enough to respond when needed. The degree of privacy changed across time and place. The modern idea of a completely private bedroom was not always the medieval ideal. For a queen, personal space could be closely connected to household service. Someone might need to help with clothing. Someone might carry messages. Someone might attend to the fire. Someone might assist with bedding. Someone might be required if the Queen needed something during the night. So preparing the bed was part of a larger system of service. The bed was ready because many people had already done their work. Someone had produced or acquired the textile. Someone had washed it. Someone had dried it. Someone had repaired it. Someone had carried fuel. Someone had prepared the chamber. Someone had tended the fire. Someone had made the mattress. Someone had arranged the curtains. The final moment of pulling the coverlet over the bed was therefore only the visible end of a much longer process. As evening becomes deeper, the castle settles further into silence. The sounds change. The great hall is quieter. The kitchen has begun to cool. Footsteps become less frequent. A door closes somewhere along a corridor. The fire gives a soft crack. Beyond the walls, the winter wind moves over the roofs. The Queen's chamber is now almost ready. But there is still one question. How did the servants make the bed itself feel warm? The answer is more interesting because it was not based on a single device. Warmth could come from several layers of preparation. The bed could be insulated from the cold. The chamber could be warmed. Additional coverings could be added. And in some historical settings, warming pans or similar devices were used to warm bedding before someone entered it. These were containers, often made from metal, that could hold hot material such as heated coals. They could be moved beneath bedding to warm the sleeping area, but their use varied by period and place, and they had to be handled carefully. Hot coals beneath cloth were not something to treat casually. A careless servant could damage expensive fabric. Worse, an ember could become a source of fire. So such methods belonged to a world in which warmth always came with responsibility. The servant had to know how hot the object was, where it had been placed, when it needed to be removed, and whether the bedding had become warm enough. In some households, heated bricks or stones could also be used as a source of warmth. Again, practices varied. There was no universal royal bedtime procedure followed across every medieval castle. Instead, there were local customs, available materials, climate, architecture, wealth, and household habits. A castle in northern Europe had different winter problems from a residence farther south. A stone fortress exposed to strong winds was different from a more sheltered manor. A wealthy royal household could afford textiles and fuel that an ordinary family could not. and a queen's chamber could receive attention that would have been impossible for most people. This difference in resources is important. The queen might sleep beneath layers of fine textiles, yet the castle itself remained a medieval building. The walls were still stone. The windows could still be drafty. The floors could still be cold. The fire could still consume fuel quickly. The winter night remained winter. Royal wealth could soften the experience. It could not completely remove the physical reality of cold weather. And so, as the servants finish arranging the bed, they may have been thinking about practical details that would seem surprisingly familiar. Is the fire still strong enough? Are the curtains properly closed? Are the blankets arranged evenly? Is there a draft? Is the bedding dry? Is the room secure? Is everything the queen might need nearby? These questions reveal something gentle about medieval household life. History is often remembered through battles, kings, treaties, castles, and crowns. But much of daily life was quieter. Someone carried water. Someone swept a floor. Someone repaired a shirt. Someone prepared bread. Someone checked a fire. Someone folded linen. Someone made a bed. The people performing these tasks rarely appear in grand historical records, yet their work allowed the great household to function. Without them, the castle would have been a very different place. The queen's evening depended on hundreds of small acts, and on a freezing night, those acts became especially noticeable. Picture yourself standing just outside the chamber. The door is partly closed. A servant makes one final adjustment to the bedding. The firelight moves across the curtains. For a moment, the room feels almost peaceful. The stone walls are still cold. The winter wind is still outside. But within the bed, layers of cloth have been gathered together. The mattress separates the sleeper from the cold beneath. The curtains reduce the movement of air. The fire provides a modest warmth, and the household has done what it can. The queen enters. Perhaps the room is quiet now. Perhaps an attendant remains nearby. Perhaps there is a final exchange of words before the night settles completely. Then the bed curtains are drawn. The outside world becomes distant. The sounds of the castle soften, and the long winter night begins. Yet the servants are not necessarily finished. A castle was a living place, even after its most important residents had gone to sleep. Fires needed attention. Doors needed watching. Animals needed care. Messages might arrive. People could fall ill. A household servant might be called at any hour. The night was therefore not simply a period when everyone disappeared into sleep. Different people slept at different times. Different duties continued. And the queen's bed, although prepared, remained part of that larger world. If the fire weakened, someone might notice. If the room became too cold, an attendant could respond. If the queen needed something, the household structure allowed assistants to arrive. This was one of the hidden advantages of royal life. Comfort depended not only on possessions, but on people. A queen did not personally gather firewood. She did not normally wash every sheet. She did not prepare every layer of bedding. She lived within a network of service. That network could make an enormous difference during winter. But it also meant that many people worked while the queen rested. And when we think about a freezing night in a medieval castle, perhaps that is the most important image to keep. Not the glitter of a crown, not the grandeur of a throne, but a quiet servant carrying another piece of folded cloth through a dark corridor. The servant's footsteps are soft against the floor. The air is cold. The fire has begun to burn lower. The bedding is waiting. And somewhere inside the castle, another winter night is being prepared. The work continues quietly. No trumpet announces it. No chronicler records every movement. Yet the simple act of making a bed has become part of the machinery of royal life. As the night grows colder, the servants make one final inspection. The sheets are smooth. The coverings are in place. The curtains are arranged. The fire is watched. The chamber is quiet. There is nothing more to do for the moment. So the servant steps away. The door closes gently. The corridor beyond is darker than the chamber, and the queen is left inside the small pocket of warmth that the household has created. Outside, frost gathers on the landscape. Inside, the fire continues to breathe softly. Wood settles in the hearth. A faint glow touches the stone. The castle rests. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the hours begin to pass. Long before central heating, electric blankets, insulated windows, and modern mattresses, people had already learned that warmth could be created through layers, careful preparation, enclosed spaces, fire, and patient routine. They could not command winter to disappear. They could only prepare for it. And in a royal household, preparing for the cold was part of the daily rhythm. Every evening brought another bed, another fire, another set of folded linens, another night beneath the heavy winter sky. And when morning finally came, the same servants who had helped prepare the queen's chamber would begin another day of work. As the morning slowly arrives, the darkness outside the castle begins to soften. The eastern sky turns from black toward gray. The winter fields become visible again. Frost shines faintly where the first daylight reaches it. Inside, the fire has become a bed of glowing embers. The room is still. The curtains remain closed. For a little while longer, the queen sleeps. And somewhere beyond the chamber, the castle is beginning to wake. A servant walks quietly through the corridor. Another prepares the fire. Another begins the day's household duties. The night has passed. The bed has done what it was prepared to do. And soon it will be opened, aired, straightened, and made ready for another evening. The cycle begins again. Warmth in a medieval castle was rarely produced by one remarkable invention. It came from repetition, from wood carried in from outside, from cloth woven months before, from mattresses carefully stuffed, from blankets layered together, from curtains drawn against drafts, from fires tended through the evening, and from servants whose names history often forgot. Their work was ordinary, but ordinary work can hold a remarkable place in history, because behind every royal ceremony was a household. Behind every household was labor, and behind every comfortable night was someone who had prepared it. The queen's bed was therefore more than a place to sleep. It was the final result of a long chain of human effort. And on a freezing winter night, that effort could be felt most clearly. The wind could howl beyond the walls. The stone could remain cold. The night could stretch for many hours. But beneath carefully arranged layers of bedding, within curtains and beside a guarded fire, the queen could find a small measure of warmth. Not perfect warmth, not modern warmth, just enough warmth to make the winter night bearable. And perhaps that is how the castle's servants understood their work. They could not change the season. They could not stop the wind. They could not make stone warm. But they could prepare one room, one bed, one quiet place. And for one night, that was enough. The castle sleeps. The winter wind moves gently across the roofs. The fire gives one final quiet crack. The curtains remain still. And beneath the layers prepared by careful hands, the long night continues toward morning. Tomorrow, the bedding will be opened again. The room will fill with daylight. The household will begin its work. And when evening returns, the same quiet preparations will begin once more. A clean sheet, a carefully arranged mattress, a heavy covering, a guarded fire, a closed curtain, and the familiar promise that, even in the coldest season, the night's sleeping place will be ready. The work will remain mostly unseen. But history has always depended on such unseen work, and so, when we picture a medieval queen settling into bed on a freezing night, we can look beyond the crown and the castle walls. We can imagine the hands that prepared the room, the hands that carried the wood, the hands that folded the linen, the hands that adjusted the coverings, the hands that checked the fire. Quiet hands, moving through a cold stone castle while most of the household slept. And when those hands finally finished, they too would disappear into the darkness. The fire would burn low. The castle would grow quiet. The winter night would continue. And the carefully prepared bed would wait beneath its layers until the first pale light of morning returned. The morning has now arrived quietly over the castle. A pale winter light enters through narrow openings in the walls, touching the stone with a soft gray glow. The fire in the queen's chamber has burned down during the night, leaving behind a bed of warm ash and a few pieces of glowing wood. The castle is waking. Somewhere below, kitchen servants are beginning their work. There is the sound of vessels being moved, doors opening and footsteps crossing stone floors. In another part of the building, animals are being tended. Outside, the first workers of the day are already moving through the cold air. But in the queen's chamber, the night has left its quiet traces. The bed is no longer perfectly arranged. The coverings have shifted during sleep. The sheets may have become creased. The warmth that had gathered beneath the blankets has disappeared into the cool morning air. And once the queen rises, the servants have another task. They must prepare the room for the day. This part of the routine is easy to overlook. When we imagine royal comfort, we tend to think about the moment when the queen climbs into a beautifully prepared bed. But the work of maintaining that bed continued after she left it. The bedding had to be examined. The chamber had to be aired. The fire had to be managed. Textiles needed to be kept dry. And anything that required cleaning or repair had to be taken away. Picture yourself entering the room shortly after sunrise. The curtains are slowly opened. Cold air enters. The contrast can be felt immediately. During the night, the curtains had helped create a smaller enclosed space around the bed. Now they are opened, allowing the room to breathe. Fresh air was valuable. bedding could absorb moisture from the body during sleep, even in a cold room. Keeping textiles dry was important for comfort and cleanliness. So the servants might shake, fold, air, or otherwise care for the bedding according to the customs of the household. The precise routine varied. There was no single method used by every castle in every century. That is an important point whenever we travel into the medieval past. The Middle Ages lasted for roughly 1,000 years. A royal residence in the 12th century was not identical to one in the 15th. A castle in England was not identical to a palace in France. A wealthy royal household was not identical to a smaller noble household. Climate, architecture, local customs, available materials, and wealth all influenced daily life. Even the meaning of the word castle changed across time. Some were primarily military strongholds. Others became comfortable residences. Some were both, and the rooms used by queens could differ greatly. Still, certain practical problems remained familiar. Cold was one of them. A stone building could become deeply uncomfortable during winter. Large rooms were difficult to heat. Windows were not designed like modern insulated windows. Doors could allow drafts. Floors could remain cold. And the fire could only warm the surrounding space to a limited degree. This meant that the bed became an important place of warmth. The sleeping area was smaller than the whole chamber. By surrounding the sleeper with layers of material, the household could concentrate warmth where it mattered most. The body itself became part of the heating process. A blanket did not create heat. Instead, it helped slow the loss of heat produced by the body. A curtain did something similar. A mattress separated the body from a colder surface. This simple arrangement is easy to understand, and yet in a medieval castle, it could make an enormous practical difference. The bed was a small protected environment inside a much larger cold building. The servants were not simply making something look beautiful. They were arranging materials to make sleeping more comfortable. And in a royal household, appearance mattered too. A queen's bed could communicate wealth. Textiles could display color, craftsmanship, embroidery, heraldic symbols, or expensive materials. The bed might be one of the most visually important objects in a chamber. Visitors could see it. Household members could recognize it. Its fabrics could demonstrate the resources of the royal household. But beneath the decoration was something much more ordinary. The bed had to work. It had to provide a reasonably comfortable place to sleep. It had to be maintained. It had to remain usable. And during winter, it had to provide protection from the cold. The people responsible for this work therefore needed practical knowledge. They knew how fabrics behaved. They knew which materials were heavy. They knew which coverings were suitable for different seasons. They knew which textiles were valuable. They knew how easily dampness could damage certain materials. They knew that fire and fabric needed to be kept under careful control. This knowledge was often passed through experience rather than formal instruction. A young servant might learn by watching an older household worker. A person responsible for the chamber could know exactly where each textile belonged. A particular blanket might have its own storage place. A certain curtain might be used only during winter. Another textile might be reserved for ceremonial occasions. The household was a place of memory. People knew where things belonged. and the bed was part of that organized world. As the morning progresses, the bedding may be removed from the immediate sleeping arrangement. Some items could be folded, others might be carried away. The mattress could be adjusted, the room could be cleaned, the fire could be renewed if the chamber was still needed. Nothing about the process was instant. Every object had to be carried by hand. Every heavy blanket required effort. Every piece of linen represented labor. This is where the difference between royal life and modern life becomes especially interesting. Today, we can change the temperature of a room with a small movement of the hand. We can wash bedding with machines. We can dry cloth quickly. We can replace a blanket with another one without thinking much about its production. In a medieval household, every stage was slower. A piece of linen began as a plant. Flax had to be cultivated. It had to be harvested and processed. Fibers had to be prepared. They had to be spun. Thread had to be woven. The cloth had to be finished. Then it had to reach the household. Wool followed a different path. Sheep were raised. Wool was sheared. It was cleaned and processed. Fibers were spun into yarn. The yarn was woven into cloth. The cloth could then be finished and sometimes dyed. The final textile was therefore the result of many people's work. When a servant lifted a heavy blanket from the queen's bed, they were handling the final product of an entire economic chain. That is why royal bedding could be valuable, and why it had to be cared for. The bed itself could also have a long life. Wooden frames could be repaired, parts could be replaced, curtains could be mended, mattresses could be restuffed, cloth could be patched. A wealthy household did not necessarily throw away an object simply because it had become worn. Repair was part of everyday life, and the servants who maintained the queen's chamber were part of this cycle. Their work was not limited to one night. It continued throughout the year. Winter brought one set of problems. Summer brought another. In cold weather, heavier bedding was useful. In warmer weather, lighter coverings might be preferred. The room itself could be arranged differently. Curtains might be opened more widely. Air could be allowed to circulate. The bed might feel very different from season to season, yet the basic rhythm remained. Prepare, use, clean, maintain, store, prepare again. This quiet repetition was one of the foundations of medieval domestic life. Now imagine returning to the castle on another winter evening. The sun has disappeared once again. The same stone walls that looked pale in the morning are now dark. The air outside has become colder. Perhaps snow has fallen. Perhaps rain has turned to ice. Perhaps the wind is moving across the courtyard. Inside, the household begins preparing for another night. The queen's chamber is checked again. The fire is brought back to life. A servant carries fresh fuel. Another checks the bedding. The curtains are inspected. Everything slowly returns to its nighttime arrangement. And here we can understand something important about servants. They were not simply anonymous figures standing behind royalty. Different servants had different roles. In large households, duties could be divided among many people. Some worked in the chamber. Some worked in the kitchen. Some managed clothing. Some handled laundry. Some cared for horses. Some worked in administrative roles. Some were responsible for security. The Queen's household could include women and men with different responsibilities depending on the time and place. Ladies-in-waiting could have personal duties connected to the Queen. Chamber servants could help maintain private spaces. Other workers supported the wider household. This structure meant that a simple action, such as preparing a bed, could involve several people. One person might bring the bedding, another might arrange it. Someone else might tend the fire. Another person might be responsible for cleaning the room. The Queen might see only a small part of this process. But the work continued around her. The castle was a network of tasks. Every completed task allowed another task to happen. The kitchen prepared food. The laundry prepared clothing. The stable prepared horses. The chamber prepared sleeping spaces. And together, these activities created the rhythm of royal life. There is something peaceful about imagining this rhythm. The winter castle is not completely silent. It has its own gentle sounds. Wood shifting in the fire, a distant door closing, footsteps on stone, the quiet movement of cloth, the soft voice of a servant speaking to another. Outside, wind moves across the battlements. Inside, the warmth of the fire reaches only so far. The Queen's bed waits in the chamber. Its curtains hang still. Its blankets have been folded carefully. And the household continues around it. Yet there is another element that deserves attention. The mattress. To modern eyes, the word mattress suggests a thick manufactured object with carefully engineered layers. Medieval mattresses were very different. They could be filled with straw or other materials. Among wealthier households, more comfortable fillings could be available. The quality of the mattress depended on the resources of the household. The filling could compress over time. It might need to be adjusted. It could become uneven. It could absorb moisture. So maintaining a mattress was not simply a matter of leaving it on the bed frame. It required attention. A servant might shake or turn it. The filling could be redistributed. Old material could be removed and replaced. The exact methods varied, but the principle was simple. A bed needed maintenance if it was going to remain comfortable, and this was especially important for someone who slept in it every night. The Queen's household therefore had a continuing responsibility. The bed could not simply be prepared once and forgotten. The same was true of pillows. Pillows could be filled with different materials depending on period and wealth. They were covered with cloth and could be protected by pillowcases or similar coverings. They too needed cleaning and repair. A comfortable bed was a collection of maintained objects. Each one had to be cared for, and each one required labor. Now imagine a servant lifting the edge of a blanket. It is heavier than a modern lightweight comforter. The fabric has weight. The room is cold. The servant's hands are already chilled. The fire is several steps away. There is no electric light, only the glow of flame and perhaps a candle. The servant adjusts the blanket carefully, not because anyone is watching, not because a historian will later describe the movement, but because it is their work. This is the quiet reality behind royal comfort. The Queen could sleep peacefully because someone else had thought about the details. Someone had noticed the draft. Someone had added another covering. Someone had made sure the fire was tended. Someone had checked the curtains. Someone had maintained the linens. Someone had prepared the chamber. Comfort was a collective achievement. And that idea continues naturally into the next part of the night. Because once the bed was prepared, another problem remained. What happened when the queen actually went to sleep? A room could be warm when the fire was burning strongly and become colder later. The temperature outside could continue falling. A bed warmed by the sleeper could retain some heat, but the surrounding air would remain cold. So the household had to think about the entire night, not only the moment of bedtime. This is one reason layers mattered. A single thin covering would provide limited protection. Several layers could trap more air between them. Air is a poor conductor of heat, which makes trapped air useful for insulation. Medieval people did not need the modern language of thermal conductivity to understand this. They knew that thick bedding was warmer than thin bedding. They knew that wool could provide warmth. They knew that covering the body more completely helped during cold nights. And they learned these things through generations of experience. The queen's bed therefore became a carefully arranged collection of layers. The exact materials differed, the quality differed, the design differed, but the goal was simple: keep the sleeper comfortable. And so, as the winter night deepens again, the servants make their final preparations. The chamber is ready, the fire is burning, the bedding is arranged, the curtains wait to be drawn, the castle outside is dark. The queen enters. For a moment, the room is still. Then the bed curtains begin to close, one side, then the other. The open chamber becomes a smaller space. The firelight becomes softer. The sounds of the castle become distant. And the queen settles beneath the coverings. The servants step away. Their work has reached another quiet ending. But beyond the curtains, the castle continues to breathe. The fire slowly consumes its fuel. The wind presses against the walls. The night grows colder, and somewhere in the distance, a watchman remains awake. The queen sleeps inside. The servants wait nearby, and the bed, prepared with layers of cloth and care, becomes a small shelter from the winter outside. There is no sudden transformation. The stone walls do not become warm. The wind does not stop. The castle does not become comfortable in the modern sense. Instead, comfort is created little by little. A blanket here, a curtain there, a fire carefully maintained, a mattress kept in good condition, a room chosen or prepared with attention. These small actions accumulate, and together they make the difference between simply enduring a winter night and sleeping through it with some degree of comfort. The hours pass. The fire becomes quieter. The castle grows still. The queen remains behind the curtains, and somewhere nearby, a servant listens to the familiar sounds of the night. Perhaps the fire needs attention. Perhaps the corridor needs checking. Perhaps nothing happens at all. That, too, is part of the work. Much of service consisted of being ready. Ready if someone called. Ready if the fire weakened. Ready if something needed to be moved. Ready if the household changed its plans. The quietest nights could require the greatest patience. And while the queen sleeps, the servants remain part of the invisible structure supporting her life. By the time the first light of morning returns, another night will have passed. The bed will be opened. The curtains will be drawn back. The fire will be examined. The room will breathe again, and the cycle will begin. Winter after winter. night after night. The same basic need remains. A human being needs warmth. A human being needs rest. And even inside a castle filled with wealth, those needs do not disappear. They simply become someone else's responsibility. The queen may have possessed fine clothing, rich food, beautiful rooms, and expensive textiles. But when winter arrived, she still had to sleep. And when she slept, the cold still existed beyond the blankets. The servants could not remove winter. They could only prepare for it. So the final image to carry with you is a quiet one, a medieval castle beneath a dark winter sky. The walls are cold, the courtyard is empty. The wind moves slowly across the roofs. Inside one chamber, a fire glows beside a carefully prepared bed. The curtains are drawn, the blankets are layered. The room is quiet. And behind all of this, comfort are people whose names may never appear in the surviving records. They have carried the wood. They have handled the linen. They have arranged the mattress. They have folded the blankets. They have watched the fire. They have closed the curtains. Their work is almost invisible, yet it surrounds the sleeping queen. And as the castle settles deeper into the winter night, their footsteps gradually disappear down the corridor. The chamber grows still. The fire gives a soft crack. The curtains do not move. Outside, the cold continues. Inside, the bed holds its warmth. And once again, the quiet machinery of the medieval household has done its work. The night can continue, and the story of the castle's winter life moves gently onward. The night has settled over the castle once again. Beyond the walls, winter has covered the countryside in darkness. The fields are quiet, the trees are bare, and the cold air moves slowly across the land. Inside, the castle is warmer than the world outside, but only by degrees. A fire burns in the queen's chamber. Its light touches the stone walls. The flames rise and fall. Every so often, a piece of wood shifts in the hearth with a quiet sound. The queen's bed stands nearby, surrounded by its curtains and layers of fabric. Everything appears ready. But preparing a royal bed was not simply about adding more blankets. The people responsible for the chamber had to understand the space itself. A cold room could make even a thick bed uncomfortable. So the location of the bed mattered. A bed placed near a doorway could be exposed to drafts. A bed directly beside a poorly sealed window could be colder than one positioned farther inside. A bed close to the fireplace could receive more warmth, but placing furniture too near an open flame brought obvious risks. The arrangement of the room therefore mattered. This was not necessarily the result of written architectural rules. It was practical knowledge. People noticed where the cold entered. They noticed where the fire warmed the room. They noticed which corners remained cold. And over time, household routines reflected these observations. Picture yourself as a servant entering the chamber on a winter evening. You feel the air immediately. Near the doorway, it is colder. Closer to the hearth, the warmth is more noticeable. The difference may be small, but your body can feel it. You know where the bed should be. You know how the curtains should hang. You know which coverings are needed tonight. The work begins without much conversation. This is one of the quiet characteristics of household service. A task performed every day eventually becomes almost instinctive. A person who has prepared the same chamber many times does not need to stop and think about every movement. They know what to carry. They know where to put it. They know what must be checked. They know what must be avoided. The castle has its own rhythm, and the servants become part of that rhythm. One of the most important materials in that rhythm is wool. Wool was widely used in medieval Europe. It was useful because it could provide warmth, and sheep were important livestock across many regions. But wool did not arrive as a finished blanket. It began with sheep. The animals had to be raised. Their wool had to be collected. It had to be cleaned and processed. Then it could be spun into yarn. The yarn could be woven. The cloth could be finished. By the time a blanket reached a royal chamber, many hands had contributed to it. That makes the blanket itself a quiet piece of history. When the servant places it across the queen's bed, the object carries an entire chain of work with it. A shepherd had cared for sheep. Someone had gathered the wool. Someone had spun the fibers. Someone had woven the cloth. Someone had transported it. Someone had stored it. And finally, someone had placed it on the bed. The warmth of the blanket is therefore connected to many people who never entered the queen's chamber. The same can be said of linen. Linen was especially important for sheets and other household textiles in many medieval settings. It was made from flax. Flax cultivation and processing required significant labor. The plant had to be harvested and prepared so that useful fibers could be separated. Those fibers were then spun and woven. Fine linen could be costly. For a royal household, the quality and quantity of linen could be a visible sign of wealth. But even the finest linen could not stop winter by itself. It worked together with other layers. A sheet could provide a clean surface against the body. A blanket could provide additional insulation. A coverlet could add another layer. Curtains could reduce drafts. The mattress could separate the sleeper from the cold bed frame or floor, and the fire could add warmth to the room. Each part had a different function. Together, they created the sleeping environment. There was also the matter of moisture. Cold weather does not always mean dry weather. Winter could bring rain, snow, damp air, and wet clothing. Moisture was a problem because damp bedding could feel colder and become unpleasant. The servants therefore had to care for textiles carefully. Bedding needed to be dried when necessary. Cloth had to be stored in places where it would not remain damp. The castle itself could have humid areas. Stone walls could hold moisture. Basements and storage rooms could be particularly cool. So keeping valuable textiles in good condition required attention. The household had to think about where things were stored. A blanket was not simply folded and forgotten. It was part of the household's inventory. Royal households could keep records of valuable objects. Clothing, textiles, furniture, and other goods could be counted, assigned, inherited, transferred, or stored. This means that a blanket might have a history beyond the night on which it was used. It could remain in the household for years. It might be repaired. It might be altered. It might be given another purpose. And eventually, it might disappear from the record entirely. Yet during its useful life, it would have passed through many hands. Now return to the Queen's chamber. The servant has arranged the blankets. The fire is steady. The curtains are hanging correctly. The room is ready. But the Queen has not yet arrived. There is still time. This period before bedtime could be used to make final adjustments. Perhaps the room needs cleaning. Perhaps a piece of furniture needs to be moved. Perhaps the fire needs more fuel. Perhaps the bedding needs to be straightened again. The servant checks everything, not because the queen will inspect every detail, but because their duty is to prepare the chamber properly. This idea of duty was central to household life. Royal households were complicated institutions. They were not simply families living together. They included people with specific responsibilities. The household had an organization. Different offices managed different parts of life. The chamber could have its own servants. The wardrobe could have its own staff. The kitchen had its own organization. The stable had its own workers. And above many of these people were officials responsible for supervising them. The exact organization varied across kingdoms and periods, but the principle remained. The queen's comfort depended on an organized household. This is why the word servant can sometimes be misleading. It sounds like one simple occupation. In reality, medieval household service could involve many kinds of work. Some servants performed highly skilled tasks. Some had positions of trust. Some worked closely with members of the royal family. Others performed physically demanding labor. Their status differed. Their pay and privileges differed. Their living conditions differed. Their responsibilities differed. A person preparing a bed could therefore belong to a much larger and more complex social system. The work was intimate because it took place in private spaces, and it could require trust. A servant working around royal clothing, bedding, personal possessions, and private rooms had access to areas that ordinary visitors could not enter. The chamber was therefore not simply a workplace, it was a place of responsibility. Now imagine the queen approaching the chamber. The sounds of her arrival are quiet. Footsteps move along the corridor. An attendant follows. The door opens. Warm air moves outward into the colder passage. The queen enters. The servants have already prepared everything. The fire is burning. The bed is ready. The curtains wait to be closed. There is perhaps a final adjustment. A blanket is moved slightly. A pillow is arranged. Then the queen settles down. The servants begin to withdraw. The room becomes quieter. But this moment also tells us something about medieval ideas of privacy. The queen's privacy was real, but it was not necessarily the same as modern privacy. A royal person could have attendants nearby at many times. Clothing could be assisted. Meals could involve servants. Travel required attendants. And sleeping arrangements could involve household members close at hand. The presence of servants did not necessarily mean the queen lacked privacy. Instead, privacy was understood differently. The household created controlled spaces within larger shared environments. Curtains could separate the bed from the rest of the room. Doors could separate the chamber from the corridor. An inner chamber could provide greater privacy than a public hall. The bed itself could become a private enclosure. This is another reason bed curtains mattered. They were not only decorative, they helped divide space. A large room could contain several functions. The curtains created a smaller personal area. For a queen, this could be especially important. The bed became a private world inside a larger household. And on a cold night, that private world had another benefit. It reduced the amount of air surrounding the sleeper. The smaller enclosed space could feel more sheltered. The curtains could slow drafts. The blankets could retain body heat. The mattress could provide insulation. The fire could warm the nearby air. Together, these measures made the bed a small refuge, not a warm room by modern standards, but a refuge nonetheless. The night deepens. The castle becomes quieter. The queen is now asleep. The servants outside the chamber continue their duties. A fire may need attention. A corridor may need watching. Someone may carry a message. Someone may close a door. The winter night does not stop the household, and in this way, the castle resembles a small living organism. Different parts continue working. Some people sleep, others work. Then they change places. The rhythm continues. For the queen, the night may feel still. For the servants, it may not be. This difference is important. Royal comfort often depended on labor happening outside the view of the person being served. The queen could experience warmth without seeing the wood being carried. She could sleep beneath a clean sheet without watching it being washed. She could enter a prepared chamber without seeing the servants arrange it. The work disappeared behind the finished result. This is common in many periods of history. Comfort often hides labor. A clean room hides the work of cleaning. A warm fire hides the work of gathering fuel. A clean garment hides the work of producing and washing cloth. A comfortable bed hides the work of preparing it. The medieval castle simply made this especially visible because so much work had to be performed by hand. Now the night becomes colder. The fire has been burning for some time. One of the servants checks it. The flames have lowered. A few more pieces of wood are added. The fire responds slowly. Orange light spreads across the hearth. The room becomes a little warmer. The servant watches for a moment, then steps away. This small action could happen again and again. Fire required fuel. Fuel required labor. And labor required time. A large household could consume enormous quantities of firewood. The exact amount depended on the building, season, number of fireplaces, fuel type, and many other factors. But the basic problem was universal. A fire cannot burn without something to burn. Someone had to obtain fuel. Someone had to transport it. Someone had to store it. Someone had to carry it to the hearth. And someone had to manage the fire. Winter therefore affected the household long before bedtime. The castle needed fuel for cooking. It needed fuel for heating. It needed fuel for other domestic activities. The supply had to be planned. A shortage could become serious. This is another reason winter preparation was not only an evening activity. The household had to think ahead. Wood stored in autumn could become essential during the coldest months. The servants preparing the queen's bed were therefore part of a much larger winter system. The blanket on the bed was one part. The wood in the fireplace was another. The clothing worn during the day was another. The food prepared in the kitchen was another. Winter survival depended on all of them. And yet, within the castle, social differences remained. The queen had access to resources that most people did not. Ordinary peasants could struggle to obtain enough fuel. They might sleep in much simpler spaces. Their bedding could be less elaborate. Their houses could be smaller, but sometimes easier to warm because there was less space. A royal chamber could be larger and more comfortable in some ways, but it also contained more stone and open space. The queen had better textiles and more servants. But the physical challenge of winter remained. This is one of the interesting contradictions of castle life. A fortress could be magnificent and uncomfortable at the same time. Thick walls could provide protection, but remain cold. Large halls could display wealth, but be difficult to heat. Beautiful stone floors could be impressive, but chilly beneath the feet. A royal bed could be richly decorated, while the surrounding air remained cold. Medieval comfort was therefore relative. The queen might have been comfortable compared with most people, but she still lived in a world before modern heating, and the servants understood this better than anyone. They felt the cold while working. They carried wood through the corridors. They handled water. They moved between warm rooms and cold passages. Their hands knew winter. Their bodies knew the difference between a room beside a fire and a corridor far away from it. They were therefore not simply preparing warmth for someone else. They were living in the same environment. Perhaps this is what makes the story of the Queen's bed more human. The people who prepared it also needed warmth. They too needed sleep. They too needed shelter. But their position in the household determined how much comfort they received. A royal bed could have layers of fine material. A servant's sleeping place might be much simpler. A queen's chamber could receive careful attention. A worker's room might be shared. A warm fire could be prioritized for important spaces. The distribution of comfort followed the hierarchy of the household, and that hierarchy was visible in many parts of medieval life. The castle was a place where social order could be felt, where people slept, what they ate, what they wore, where they stood, who they served. All of these things could reflect status. The queen's bed was therefore not only practical, it was also a symbol of rank. A beautifully prepared royal bed showed that the person who slept there occupied a special position. But underneath that symbolism was the simple human need for rest. The queen still became tired. She still needed sleep. She still felt cold. She still needed a comfortable place to lie down. And this is why the servants' work mattered. They transformed expensive materials and practical knowledge into something the queen could feel. Warmth, softness, privacy, security, rest. The night continues. The fire has settled into a steady glow. The queen sleeps. The servants move quietly through the castle. Outside, the wind has become softer. Snow may cover the courtyard. Frost may be forming along the edges of the windows. Inside the chamber, the curtains remain closed. The bed holds the warmth gathered beneath its coverings. Nothing dramatic happens. And that is exactly the point. Most nights in history were not filled with great events. People simply went to sleep. They woke. They worked. They ate. They prepared for another night. The great events remembered by historians occupied only a small portion of ordinary life. Between battles and coronations were thousands of quiet evenings. A servant folding cloth. A cook tending a fire. A groom caring for a horse. A queen settling beneath blankets. A watchman walking along a wall. These small moments made up most of history. And if we stay with the castle long enough, we can begin to hear them. The soft footsteps, the low fire, the rustle of cloth, the distant sound of wind, the quiet closing of a door, the long pause between one sound and another. The castle is sleeping, and yet, beneath the silence, the household continues its work. The queen's bed remains warm, the curtains remain closed, the fire slowly burns down. Another hour passes. Then another. The servants who prepared the chamber have moved elsewhere. The night watch continues. The castle waits for morning. And when morning comes, the same cycle will begin again. The curtains will open. The bedding will be aired. The fire will be renewed. The room will be cleaned. The queen will rise. The servants will return to their duties. And another winter day will begin. But before that happens, the castle has several more quiet hours to endure. The darkness outside grows deeper. The stone walls hold the cold. The fire becomes smaller. And inside the carefully prepared bed, beneath layers gathered together by many hands, the queen remains sheltered from the worst of the winter air. The warmth is not perfect. It does not need to be. It only needs to last until morning. And slowly, gently, the night moves forward. The servants have done their work. The bed is ready. The fire is watched. The castle is quiet. And winter waits outside. Tomorrow evening, the preparation will begin again. Another fire, another bed, another set of blankets, another quiet journey through the same ancient rhythm of work, warmth, and sleep. For now, however, there is nothing more to do. The castle rests. The queen sleeps. The embers glow. And the long winter night continues toward dawn. The night is still deep when the castle begins to settle into its quietest hours. The great hall has become dark. The kitchen fires have been reduced, though some may still glow. The corridors are almost empty. Beyond the thick walls, the winter wind passes over the roofs and through the surrounding countryside. Inside the queen's chamber, the fire gives a softer light now. The bed curtains are closed. Behind them, the warmth gathered during the earlier hours has become its own small shelter. But the story of a royal bed is not only a story about warmth. It is also a story about cleanliness, order, privacy, storage, fabric, fire, and the people whose work connected all of these things. To understand the bed fully, we have to follow the objects themselves. Imagine a linen sheet lying quietly across the mattress. It may look simple, but it is not simple. Before that sheet ever reached the queen's chamber, flax had been grown, harvested, processed, spun, woven, and finished. Someone had worked for hours over the fiber. Someone had transformed plants into thread. Someone had woven the thread into cloth. The finished fabric then had to be transported and stored. If it was fine linen intended for an important household, its value could be considerable. The sheet was therefore treated as something worth caring for. It was not simply pulled off the bed and discarded. It entered a cycle of washing, drying, folding, storage, and reuse. The same was true of other textiles. A blanket might be thick and heavy. A coverlet could be decorated. A curtain could be made from valuable cloth. A pillow covering could be fine and carefully finished. All of these objects required labor, and all of them had to be protected from damage. This was especially important during winter. Moisture was a constant concern. A cold room could be damp. A wet textile could take time to dry. Smoke from fires could affect fabrics. Dust and dirt could accumulate. Moths and other pests could damage stored woolens. The household therefore had to maintain its textiles carefully. Storage mattered. Folding mattered. Cleaning mattered. Ventilation mattered. And the people who worked in these areas needed experience. This is one of the less visible sides of medieval royal life. The queen could sleep beneath an impressive covering, but somewhere else in the castle, people were responsible for keeping that covering usable. They might inspect it, repair it, clean it, store it, and bring it back when needed. The bed therefore connected the private chamber to many other parts of the household. There might be a room where textiles were stored. There might be workers responsible for laundry. There might be people responsible for clothing and household fabrics. The precise organization differed across time and place, but the principle remained. A royal bed depended on an entire support system. And that system continued working even when the queen was asleep. Now picture the laundry area. It is very different from the quiet chamber. There may be water being carried, cloth being handled, steam rising from hot water, people working together. The smell of wet fabric, smoke, soap, and perhaps wood fills the air. Laundry was physically demanding. Clothing and bedding could become heavy when wet. Water had to be obtained and carried. Large pieces of cloth had to be washed by hand. They had to be rinsed. Then they had to be dried. In cold weather, drying could become more difficult. This meant that the castle's laundry work was closely connected to the seasons. The queen's clean sheets did not simply appear. They had passed through many hands. When we return to the chamber, the bed looks effortless. That is the illusion created by finished work. The sheet lies smooth. The blanket is folded. The curtain hangs neatly. The fire burns. The room is ready. But behind that calm appearance is a great amount of labor. The same is true of the fire. A servant does not simply walk into the room and create warmth. The fuel has already been gathered. Wood has been cut. It has been transported. It has been stored. It has been carried into the building. The hearth has been prepared. The fire has been lit. Then it must be tended. One piece of wood may burn quickly. Another may burn more slowly. The servant learns how to arrange the fuel. They know when to add another piece. They know how to keep the fire alive without making it too large, and they understand that an open flame requires caution. The queen's bedding may be valuable. A spark can damage cloth. A badly controlled fire can become dangerous. So warmth must always be balanced with safety. This is another reason the bed could not simply be placed as close as possible to the fireplace. Heat was useful. Fire was dangerous. The servants had to find the balance. This practical knowledge would have been learned through experience. And because the same household might remain in one place for years, knowledge of particular rooms could become highly specific. A servant could know that one window allowed more wind than another. They could know that a particular corner remained cold. They could know that one fireplace drew better than another. They could know where smoke tended to gather. The castle was not an abstract building. It was a familiar workplace. Its servants knew its sounds, its doors, its stairways, its drafts, its fires, its cold rooms, its warm rooms. They knew how it behaved during winter, and that knowledge mattered. Now imagine a freezing evening when the temperature outside falls sharply. The castle walls are colder than they were earlier in the day. The stone floor feels hard beneath the feet. The queen's chamber has been warmed, but the warmth is limited. The servants bring additional coverings. They do not necessarily pile everything onto the bed at once. The arrangement has to remain practical. Too many layers can make movement difficult. Heavy bedding can become uncomfortable. The room itself still needs ventilation. The fire still needs attention. So the servants make careful choices. This is another reason we should avoid imagining one universal medieval method. Different households solved the same problem in different ways. Some had better fireplaces, some had more textiles, some had better windows, some had warmer local climates, some had larger staffs, some had fewer resources. A queen in one castle could experience winter very differently from a queen in another. Yet the fundamental challenge remained. How do you make a cold stone room comfortable enough for sleep? The answer was gradual. Reduce drafts. Keep the body insulated. Maintain the fire. Use suitable textiles. Keep bedding dry. Create privacy. And prepare the room before the sleeper arrives. These methods were simple. But simple does not mean ineffective. Human beings have always used layers and enclosed spaces to stay warm. The medieval household simply relied on materials that could be produced with the technology of its time. Wool, linen, wood, straw, animal fibers, metal, stone. Each had its place. Each had advantages. Each had limitations. And the servants understood these materials through daily experience. The mattress, for example, was not only about softness. It also helped separate the body from the colder structure beneath. The sheets provided a cleaner surface. The blankets provided warmth. The curtains helped shield the sleeping area. The fire warmed the chamber. Together, they created a layered environment. And this layered approach is still familiar today. We use mattresses, sheets, blankets, curtains, heating. The technology has changed. The basic human problem has not. We want to be warm when we sleep. We want the sleeping place to feel clean. We want protection from drafts. We want some privacy. And we want the environment to feel safe. The medieval queen wanted these things too. The difference was that every part required more human effort. The castle's servants were therefore constantly adjusting the environment. They did not control temperature with a device. They controlled it with choices. Move the bed. Add fuel. Close the curtain. Use another blanket. Open a window. Close a door. Air the bedding. Dry the cloth. These small actions became the household's form of climate control, and they were performed by people. Now the queen is asleep. The servant quietly checks the chamber one more time. The fire is steady. The bedding is secure. The curtains are closed. Nothing needs immediate attention. The servant leaves. The corridor is dark. For a moment, the chamber is completely still. Then the fire makes a soft sound. A log settles. The glow moves across the floor. The queen remains asleep. This is perhaps the most peaceful part of the entire routine. The work has disappeared. Only the result remains. Warmth. Quiet. Darkness. Rest. But somewhere in the castle, other people are awake. A watchman walks. A servant tends another fire. Someone may be preparing for the next morning. Someone may be sleeping in a smaller room. The castle contains many different experiences of the same winter night. The queen has one bed. A servant has another. A guard has another sleeping place. A kitchen worker may rest near the area where they work. A stable worker may sleep closer to the animals. The winter cold reaches them all, but the protection available to each person differs. This is one of the clearest ways to understand medieval social hierarchy. Comfort was unevenly distributed. The queen's bed could contain valuable textiles. Her chamber could receive careful attention. Her fire could be maintained by servants. Others had fewer layers, fewer resources, and less control over their sleeping environment. Yet even among ordinary people, people developed their own ways of coping with winter. They used bedding. They shared warmth. They slept near hearths. They used clothing and household materials as insulation. Human ingenuity was not limited to royal households. The difference was largely one of resources and scale. The queen's household could devote more labor to comfort. And because the queen's comfort mattered politically and socially, that labor could be substantial. A royal person was not merely another member of the household. Their health and ability to function could have consequences for the wider realm. The queen might be expected to receive visitors, attend ceremonies, travel, participate in court life, manage household affairs, correspond with others. And in many historical contexts, royal women had significant political and administrative responsibilities. So ensuring adequate rest was part of maintaining the functioning of the household. The bed was therefore not an insignificant object. It supported the person who occupied an important place in the social and political structure. Still, we should not imagine servants standing nervously around the bed every minute. Most of the time, the work was routine. A skilled household worker could perform it calmly. The atmosphere might even be ordinary. People talked quietly. They knew one another. They knew the schedule. They knew what had to be done. History often becomes more believable when we allow ordinary behavior to exist alongside extraordinary status. A queen could be surrounded by luxury and still have a servant complain about cold fingers. A beautiful chamber could still contain a smoky fire. A valuable blanket could still have a worn edge. A royal bed could still need repair. The medieval world was not perfectly polished. It was lived in. Objects became worn. People became tired. Fires produced smoke. Cloth became dirty. Wood cracked. Stone gathered dust. The servant's work existed partly because everything required maintenance. That is why the bed had to be prepared again and again. No single night solved the problem. Winter was a season. And every evening within that season required another preparation. Now imagine the queen's chamber several hours after midnight. The fire is lower. The castle is colder. The bed curtains are still closed. The blankets remain in place. Outside, perhaps snow has begun to fall again. It lands quietly on the courtyard. The roofs become pale. The battlements disappear into darkness. Inside, the queen sleeps. The castle does not move. For a moment, it seems as though time itself has slowed. This is the kind of quiet that would have existed long before electric lights and modern heating. People everywhere have known this feeling. The world becomes dark. The household becomes silent. The body becomes tired. And sleep comes. The technology is different. The human experience is not. Perhaps the most important lesson from the Queen's winter bed is therefore not about luxury. It is about adaptation. Medieval people lived with cold because they had to. They learned how buildings behaved. They learned which materials were useful. They developed household routines. They used layers. They used fire. They used curtains. They used clothing. They used their own experience. And servants transformed that knowledge into practical action. A queen did not need to understand every detail. She simply entered a prepared room. But someone had done the thinking. Someone had checked the conditions. Someone had decided what the chamber needed. That person might never be remembered, yet their work was essential. As the hours continue, the fire becomes quieter still. The servant who had last checked it may now be resting. Another worker may take responsibility later. The household shifts gently through the night. Different people take their turn. And this pattern reminds us that service was not a single moment. It was continuous. The castle needed people awake. People carrying. People cleaning. People cooking. People watching. People repairing. People preparing. The Queen's bed was simply one part of that vast network. The final warmth beneath the blankets was connected to everything else. The wood came from the landscape. The wool came from animals. The linen came from plants. The metal came from mines and workshops. The mattress filling came from agricultural production. The labor came from people. The castle brought all these things together. And then, for a few quiet hours, they became a place where a human being could sleep. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about ordinary objects. They contain the world that produced them. A blanket contains sheep, fields, workers, spinners, weavers, traders, and servants. A sheet contains flax, soil, water, spinning, weaving, washing, and folding. A fire contains trees, forests, labor, transport, storage, and careful tending. A bed contains woodworkers, textile workers, servants, and the household that uses it. Nothing is truly simple when we look closely. The Queen lies quietly beneath the blankets. But beneath her is an entire world of work. And now the winter night begins to move toward its final hours. The darkness is no longer quite as deep. The fire glows faintly. The wind has softened. The castle remains still. The first signs of morning are beginning far beyond the walls. Soon the curtains will open. Soon the servants will return. Soon the Queen will wake. The bed will lose its warmth. The room will change again. But for this moment, everything remains still. The Queen sleeps. The fire breathes. The stone walls hold the silence. And the carefully prepared layers of the bed continue to protect her from the cold. The servants' work has become invisible again, and perhaps that is the natural ending of their work. When everything is done correctly, no one notices. The room simply feels ready. The bed simply feels warm enough. The fire simply seems to be burning. The curtains simply hang where they should. The Queen simply sleeps. Behind that simplicity is experience. Patience, labor, planning, and a long tradition of adapting to winter. As the morning slowly approaches, the castle will begin another day. The servants will rise. The fire will be renewed. The bedding will be opened and cared for. The queen will leave the bed, and the room will wait for evening. Then, once again, the cycle will begin. The same hands will prepare the same quiet space. The same cold season will return night after night, and once again, the queen will have a bed prepared for the winter. Not because the castle could defeat the cold, but because its people had learned how to live with it. The wind may pass over the walls, the stone may remain cold, the winter sky may darken. Yet inside, through layers of cloth, careful fire tending, enclosed space, and human effort, a small pocket of comfort can be created. And sometimes, throughout history, that small pocket of comfort has been enough. The fire gives one final soft crack. The curtains remain still. The queen sleeps. And beyond the castle walls, the winter night slowly gives way to dawn. The deepest part of the night has passed. Beyond the castle walls, the winter sky is slowly changing. The darkness is no longer complete. A faint grayness is beginning to appear above the distant horizon, though inside the castle the corridors remain dim. The queen is still sleeping. The bed curtains are closed. The blankets have settled during the night. The fire has become a quiet collection of embers. For several hours, the room has remained almost unchanged. But soon, the castle will wake. And when it does, the quiet work surrounding the queen's bed will begin another cycle. A servant enters carefully. The door opens only enough to allow a person through. Cold air from the corridor enters the chamber. The servant looks toward the hearth first. The fire is low. There is still warmth in the ashes. A few pieces of wood remain glowing beneath the surface. The servant does not disturb the queen. For the moment, the chamber remains quiet. This simple scene could have been repeated many times in royal households during colder months. The details would have differed from castle to castle. The people would have changed. The beds would have looked different. The materials would have varied. But the need remained the same. A sleeping person needed protection from cold. A royal household had people whose job was to provide it. And so, the night gradually becomes morning. The curtains are opened. Pale daylight enters. The heavy folds of fabric move slowly. The air feels colder now because the warmth accumulated during the night is beginning to disappear. The queen wakes. The chamber begins to change from a private sleeping space into a working room again. The bed is no longer simply a place of rest. It is now an object that must be maintained. The coverings are carefully removed. The sheets are examined. The pillows are adjusted. The mattress may need attention. The curtains are opened wider. Fresh air enters the room. The bed has completed its purpose for the night. But its work is not finished. It must be prepared for another night. This is one of the most important ideas to remember. A medieval bed was not a permanent object that remained untouched until bedtime. It belonged to a cycle. The cycle began with preparation, then came use, then cleaning and airing, then storage or adjustment, then preparation again. The same cycle could continue for years, and every part of it required human effort. A royal household could have people specifically responsible for aspects of this work. Their exact titles and duties changed over time, Some worked in chambers. Some handled clothing and textiles. Some worked in laundry. Some carried fuel. Some maintained rooms. Some supervised other servants. A queen's household was a complicated organization. And within it, even a simple bed could create many different tasks. This is why the question of how servants prepared a queen's bed opens a much larger window into medieval life. The bed shows us how people understood comfort. It shows us how they used materials. It shows us how households organized labor. It shows us how wealth changed daily life. It shows us how winter affected everyone. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that history is made from small things. A blanket, a sheet, a piece of wood, a curtain, a mattress, a fire. None of these objects seems extraordinary, but together, they shaped how people experienced the night. Imagine holding a medieval blanket in your hands. It would not feel like a modern blanket. It might be heavier. The texture could be rougher. The weave could be different. The fabric might carry the faint smell of wool, smoke, storage, or the household itself. If it were decorated, its colors might reflect the dyes available to the period and the wealth of the household. It would have been made by people. And those people may never have imagined that centuries later, someone would wonder how it had been used. Yet that blanket could have been one of the most important objects in the room during winter, because when the fire could not warm every corner, the blanket could travel with the sleeper. It went where the heat was needed. The same was true of clothing. A person did not stop being affected by winter simply because they were indoors. Layers of clothing could provide additional insulation during the day. At night, bedding performed much of the same function. The queen could remove some clothing before sleeping, but the blankets became her main protection from the cold. This is why bedding and clothing were closely connected in medieval life. Both depended on textiles. Both required production and maintenance. Both reflected wealth. Both could be repaired. Both could be inherited. And both could become extremely valuable possessions. The royal household, therefore, needed a system for managing cloth. The fabrics had to be stored. They had to be counted. They had to be protected. They had to be cleaned. They had to be repaired. And when the season changed, different items might be brought forward. Winter was the season for heavier coverings. Summer could call for lighter bedding. The household adapted. The bed changed with the weather. This seasonal rhythm continued year after year. And the servants learned it through experience. They knew when winter was approaching. They knew when additional coverings would be needed. They knew when the chamber became uncomfortable. They knew when a textile was too damp. They knew when a fire needed attention. Their knowledge was practical rather than theoretical. They did not need to describe insulation in scientific terms. They simply knew that wool was warm. They knew that drafts were unpleasant. They knew that thick curtains helped. They knew that a fire needed fuel. They knew that dry bedding was better than damp bedding. These simple observations formed a kind of household science, and it was passed from person to person. A young servant learned from an experienced worker. An experienced worker learned from someone before them. Over generations, the knowledge accumulated. The castle itself became a teacher. Every cold room taught a lesson. Every draft revealed a weakness. Every successful winter preparation became part of a household memory. Now imagine the queen leaving the bed. The room is no longer dark. The first daylight reveals details that were hidden during the night. The fabric of the curtains, the wooden frame, the folds of the blankets, the ashes in the hearth, the marks of use. The servants begin their morning work. The queen's chamber becomes active again, but somewhere in the castle, the next winter task is already waiting. Fuel must be carried. Food must be prepared. Clothing must be handled. Animals must be cared for. Messages must be delivered. Rooms must be cleaned. The castle is waking as a whole. The bed was only one part of it. And this brings us to something that is easy to miss when we imagine royal life. A queen's comfort was not produced by luxury alone. It was produced by organization. A pile of expensive blankets does not make a warm bed by itself. Someone must know when to use them. Someone must carry them. Someone must arrange them. Someone must clean them. Someone must repair them. Someone must store them. Someone must protect them from moisture and fire. Luxury required labor. And the larger the royal household, the more complex that labor could become. This is why castles were filled with people. The queen did not live alone. The king did not live alone. Royal life depended on a community of workers. Their labor was visible during ceremonies, but much of it was invisible during ordinary evenings. A servant quietly adjusting a blanket could be just as necessary to the functioning of the household as someone preparing for a public ceremony. The difference was simply that one task was remembered, the other disappeared. Perhaps this is why the story of a queen's winter bed feels so intimate. It brings us away from grand history, away from battles, away from political arguments, away from royal portraits, and into the quiet space where a person simply wants to sleep. The queen was still a human being. She became tired. She needed warmth. She needed rest. She could be uncomfortable. She could feel the cold. And when she closed her eyes at night, the world outside her chamber still existed. The wind still moved. The stone still held the cold. The fire still needed fuel. The servants still worked. The difference was that she had a household capable of preparing a better sleeping environment than most people could afford. This did not make winter disappear. It made winter more manageable. That distinction matters. A royal castle was not a modern hotel. There was no central heating system spreading an even temperature through every room. There were no electric lights. There were no machine-washed sheets waiting in a linen cupboard. There was no instant replacement if something broke. Everything depended on preparation. The household had to anticipate needs, and winter encouraged this habit. Before the coldest months, fuel had to be available. Warm clothing had to be ready. Bedding had to be inspected. Rooms had to be maintained. Food supplies had to be considered. The castle could not simply wait until the cold arrived. It had to prepare, and the queen's bed was part of that preparation. The heavy blankets that appeared at night represented decisions made earlier. The firewood had been stored before it was needed. The textiles had been produced long before they reached the chamber. The mattress had been constructed and maintained. The curtains had been made and installed. The room had been chosen and arranged. Comfort was therefore the result of planning, Not a single action, a chain of actions. And when the chain worked well, the final result felt simple. A warm bed, a quiet room, a safe night. The queen could sleep, the servants could step away, and the castle could continue into the darkness. Now, think of the winter landscape beyond the walls. Perhaps snow lies across the fields. Perhaps the road is difficult to travel. Perhaps trees are covered with frost. Perhaps the wind has become still. The countryside is sleeping too. Animals are sheltered. Farmers are resting after the day's work. Villages are quiet. Fires burn in homes across the landscape. The queen's chamber is only one warm place among many. The difference is the scale of the resources available to it. The queen has more layers, more fuel, more servants, more carefully maintained textiles. But the basic human need is shared: warmth, sleep, shelter, rest. In that sense, the queen and the servant are not completely different. Both experience winter. Both feel cold. Both need rest. Both depend on fire and shelter. The difference is how much protection their social position allows them to receive. That is one of the quiet truths revealed by the history of beds. They show us inequality without needing a battlefield. The thickness of a blanket, the quality of a mattress, the number of textiles, the warmth of a chamber, the number of people available to prepare it. These things can tell us about wealth. But they also tell us about work. The queen's comfort was possible because other people worked. And those workers also lived inside the same castle. They carried the wood. They handled the water. They cleaned the fabric. They repaired the furniture. They prepared the rooms. Their labor was the foundation of royal comfort. As the day progresses, the queen's bed becomes less important for a while. The chamber is used for other activities. People may enter. Messages may arrive. Clothing may be changed. Household matters may be discussed. The bed remains there quietly, waiting. Its next use is still many hours away. But somewhere, a servant is already thinking ahead. The firewood must be ready. The room must be clean. The bedding must be available. The curtains must be in place. The night will come again. And so the cycle continues. Morning becomes afternoon. Afternoon becomes evening. The winter sun disappears early. The temperature falls. The castle changes once again. The great hall becomes bright with firelight. The corridors darken. The queen finishes the day's activities. And eventually, the chamber will need to be prepared. The same work begins again. The servant enters. The fire is checked. The bed is inspected. The sheets are arranged. The coverings are brought. The curtains are prepared. Everything is ready. It is almost the same scene as the previous night. But this repetition is exactly what made it effective. A routine does not need to be dramatic. It needs to work. And the servants' routines were designed to work. Night after night. Winter after winter. Generation after generation. The castle may change hands. A queen may grow older. A new queen may arrive. Servants may leave. New workers may replace them. But the need for warmth remains. A new evening arrives. The queen enters. The fire burns. The blankets are arranged. The curtains close. And the castle settles into darkness. There is something deeply peaceful about this repetition. The world changes around the castle. Kings die. Queens are replaced. Wars begin and end. Borders shift. Generations pass. But ordinary routines continue. Someone still makes a bed. Someone still lights a fire. Someone still folds a blanket. Someone still closes a curtain. History is built from both the extraordinary and the ordinary. The great events leave written records. The quiet work often leaves only traces. A surviving piece of fabric, an inventory, a household account, a reference to a servant, a record of cloth purchased, a mention of fuel. These fragments can help us reconstruct the world. But much of the experience remains silent. We cannot hear the exact footsteps. We cannot feel the exact temperature. We cannot know the precise thoughts of one servant preparing one particular bed. So when we imagine the scene, we must keep it grounded. We can know the materials. We can know the technology. We can understand the household structure. We can understand the challenges of heating medieval buildings. But we should leave room for uncertainty. Not every queen slept in the same kind of bed. Not every castle used the same methods. Not every winter was equally severe. Not every servant performed the same duties. History is not a single picture. It is a collection of many lives. And somewhere within those lives were countless winter nights. Quiet nights. Cold nights. Ordinary nights. Nights when a servant prepared a bed. Nights when a queen climbed beneath the coverings. Nights when a fire was watched. Nights when the wind pressed against the walls. Nights when nothing important happened at all. Those nights are part of history too. Now imagine one final winter evening. The sun has gone down. The castle is quiet. A servant stands beside the queen's bed. The room is ready. The mattress has been checked. The sheets are smooth. The blankets are layered. The curtains are hanging. The fire is burning steadily. The servant looks around the room. Nothing has been forgotten. They step away. The queen enters. She pauses for a moment near the fire. The warmth touches her face. Outside, the wind moves over the stone. Inside, the chamber feels sheltered. She approaches the bed. The blankets are lifted. She settles down. The curtains begin to close. The room becomes smaller. The firelight becomes softer. The castle fades into the background, and the queen rests. The servant leaves quietly. The corridor is dark. Footsteps move away, then disappear. The fire continues. The winter wind continues. The bed remains warm, and the long night begins. There is no great event, no announcement, no spectacle. Only the quiet completion of a task. A bed has been prepared. A room has been warmed. A person has been given a place to rest. That simple act connects us to people who lived hundreds of years ago. Because although the castle has disappeared or changed, the need for sleep remains. We still close curtains. We still arrange blankets. We still prefer a warm room on a cold night. We still appreciate clean sheets. We still seek shelter from winter. The tools have changed. The buildings have changed. The technology has changed. But the human feeling has not. A cold night makes warmth valuable. A dark room makes a small fire comforting. A heavy blanket can make sleep easier. And someone, somewhere, has always had to prepare the place where that sleep happens. In a medieval castle, that person was often a servant. Their work may have begun long before the queen entered the chamber. They may have carried fuel, prepared textiles, checked the room, adjusted the bedding, maintained the fire. And when the queen finally slept, their work became invisible. That is the strange beauty of service. The better the work is done, the less noticeable it becomes. A perfectly prepared bed looks effortless. A warm room feels natural. A clean sheet seems simple, but each one is the result of human hands. And so, when we picture the queen sleeping on a freezing night, we should also remember the quiet workers outside the curtains, the people who made that comfort possible. They are part of the story, perhaps more than the gold, more than the decorations, more than the impressive stone walls. Because the castle was never only stone, it was people. People carrying, people cooking, people cleaning, people repairing, people watching, people waiting, people preparing. And among all these tasks was one of the simplest: preparing a bed. On a freezing night, that simple task became a small act of care. The servants could not stop winter. They could not warm the entire castle. They could not change the weather. But they could make one sleeping place warmer. They could place one more layer between the sleeper and the cold. They could close the curtains. They could tend the fire. They could make the night more comfortable. And sometimes, that was enough. The fire burns lower. The castle becomes silent. The queen sleeps behind the curtains. Outside, winter continues across the land. The moon moves slowly above the walls. Frost gathers on the roofs. The fields remain still. And inside the chamber, the warmth created by fire, fabric, wood, and human effort remains for a little while longer. The night passes. Then morning returns. The curtains open. The bed is uncovered. The room breathes. The servants begin again, and history moves forward. Another day, another evening, another winter night, another bed, another quiet act of preparation. The cycle never needed to be dramatic. It simply needed to continue. And perhaps, as you imagine that old castle now, the most peaceful image is the final one. The corridors are empty. The hearth is glowing softly. The heavy curtains are still. The queen is asleep. Beyond the walls, the winter wind moves across the dark countryside. Inside, layers of bedding hold a little warmth. The work of many hands has become almost invisible. The castle rests. And slowly, gently, the night carries everyone toward morning. As the morning slowly arrives, the first pale light touches the distant hills. The winter sky begins to brighten. The fire has almost become ash. The queen's bed remains quiet. Soon, the servants will return. Soon, the curtains will open. Soon, the household will wake. But for this final moment, there is only stillness. A warm bed inside a cold castle, a quiet fire, a sleeping queen, and the unseen labor that made her rest possible. Long before modern heating, modern bedding, and modern comfort, people already understood the simple wisdom of preparing carefully for a cold night. They used what they had. They worked with the materials around them. They learned from experience. They passed knowledge from one generation to another. And they created warmth, not through one remarkable invention, but through many small decisions. A thick layer, a closed curtain, a steady fire, a dry sheet, a carefully maintained mattress, a quiet room, and the patient hands of servants. That is how a freezing night could become bearable inside a medieval castle. Not because the cold disappeared, but because people learned how to live with it. And perhaps that is where our journey through the Queen's winter bed can finally rest. The castle remains behind us. The fire fades. The corridors grow quiet. The winter wind continues across the countryside. And the bed, carefully prepared by human hands, holds its warmth for one more night. The Queen sleeps. The servants have finished their work. Morning waits beyond the curtains. And history, as it always does, quietly moves on.